The mother traded her 2 daughters for a lover and left them with a neighbor. Feeling a mix of hope and heartache and wondering if she has just turned her world upside down. In the stillness of the early morning, she sat by the window, her gaze lost in the hues of the breaking dawn. The apartment was filled with the unfamiliar sounds of a new life, a life she had chosen, a life with him. But in the quiet of these moments, her mind wandered back to them, her daughters, left behind in the wake of her pursuit of happiness. Her thoughts were a tangle of guilt and longing. Each sunrise brought a reminder of their smiles, their tears, their small hands clasping hers. She remembered the way they would run to her after a long day, their stories and laughter filling the room. Now, the silence was overwhelming. She had left seeking a love that was different, perhaps more consuming, but the price of this new beginning was steep. A choice made for her own happiness, yet it felt like a betrayal. Miles away, in a modest, familiar house, 2 young girls faced the day with a heaviness in their hearts. Their mother's departure had left a void, one that the kind neighbor, Mr. Henderson, tried earnestly to fill. He had stepped in as a guardian, a role he accepted with a mix of concern and awkwardness. He made pancakes for breakfast, attempting to replicate their mother's recipe, but the taste wasn't quite right. His efforts to engage them in conversation over dinner were met with polite responses, but the warmth and ease they once felt were missing. The older sister, more acutely aware of the change, would often retreat into silence, her eyes betraying a mix of resentment and sadness. The younger one, still hopeful, would sometimes ask when Mommy was coming back, a question that lingered in the air unanswered. School had become a refuge and a reminder of their altered reality. Friends asked questions they couldn't answer, teachers showed concern they couldn't fully appreciate. The world moved on around them, but they felt stuck, caught in a limbo of before and after. The contrast between their lives was stark. One, a mother grappling with the consequences of her choices, seeking fulfillment but haunted by regret. The other, 2 daughters adapting to a life turned upside down, finding solace in the familiarity of their home but feeling the absence of the one who had made it complete. Their paths had diverged, yet they remained connected by the invisible threads of family, love, and memories. The journey ahead was uncertain, each day a step towards understanding and perhaps, in time, a path back to each other. As the days turned into weeks, the novelty of her new life began to dull. She found herself caught in a relentless cycle of reminiscence and regret. Her lover, once a beacon of hope and excitement, now seemed like just another person sharing her space, oblivious to the turmoil within her. Nights were the hardest. Lying awake, she would think of her daughters, picturing them in their beds, in the home she had left behind. Her heart ached with a maternal longing she couldn't quench. She began to question the choices that led her here. Was the pursuit of personal happiness worth the cost? Meanwhile, her daughters were fighting their own battles. The older one, now more withdrawn, struggled to keep up with her schoolwork. Her grades, once a source of pride, had started to slip. She found it hard to focus, her mind constantly wandering to the void left by their mother. The younger sister tried to remain cheerful, but the strain was evident. She clung to Mr. Henderson, seeking in him the comfort she once found in her mother. But despite his best efforts, he could not fully bridge the gap. He watched them with a growing sense of helplessness, wishing he could do more. At school, the girls faced whispers and sideways glances. Their classmates, aware of their situation, oscillated between curiosity and pity. The sisters felt increasingly isolated, a sense of being different, marked by their mother's absence. One evening, as Mr. Henderson set the dinner table, he noticed the older sister's eyes brimming with tears. He hesitated, unsure of how to approach her. Finally, he gently asked if she wanted to talk about it. The floodgates opened, and she poured out her frustrations and fears, her voice laced with a mix of anger and sorrow. The younger sister, overhearing the conversation, joined in. They spoke of their mother, their confusion about why she left, and their longing for her return. Mr. Henderson listened, offering words of comfort but knowing they fell short. In her apartment, the mother penned a letter to her daughters. It was filled with apologies and explanations, but each time she read it over, it seemed inadequate. The words couldn't convey the depth of her emotions, the complexity of her choices. With a heavy heart, she tucked the letter away, unresolved. As the distance between them grew, so did their struggles. The mother grappled with her guilt and yearning, while her daughters navigated a world that felt increasingly foreign. Their lives, once intertwined, now ran on parallel tracks, each marked by a profound sense of loss. Yet, in this chasm of separation, a subtle understanding began to emerge, an understanding that the choices we make are never without consequence, and the paths we choose inevitably shape not just our lives, but the lives of those we love. The initial thrill of her new relationship had begun to fade, revealing a more complex reality. She started to see her lover not as an escape, but as another person with his own flaws and complexities. The apartment that once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a cage, a constant reminder of what she had given up. Her thoughts increasingly turned to her daughters. She imagined them growing up without her, milestones missed, moments lost. The realization that she was missing these irreplaceable times filled her with a profound sense of grief. She began to question not just her decision to leave, but the very foundations of the love that had driven her to it. The man she had left everything for now seemed less like a soulmate and more like a stranger. Back in their old home, the daughters' struggles continued. The older sister's feelings of abandonment turned to resentment. She became more rebellious, pushing against the boundaries set by Mr. Henderson, testing his patience and her limits. The younger sister, meanwhile, faced her own crisis. She fell ill, a minor sickness, but enough to bring the reality of their situation into sharp focus. Mr. Henderson, despite his best efforts, was overwhelmed. He realized, with a sinking heart, that he could provide shelter and sustenance, but he could not fill the void left by their mother. The illness served as a wake-up call for the older sister. Seeing her younger sibling in distress, she began to let go of her anger, stepping up to care for her. In this role reversal, she found a semblance of purpose, a distraction from her own pain. At school, the sisters found themselves increasingly isolated. The older sister's defiance and the younger sister's vulnerability made them targets for both concern and gossip. They clung to each other, the only constant in their rapidly changing world. Meanwhile, the mother's internal conflict reached a breaking point. She began to write to her daughters, letters filled with apologies and promises, but each time, she stopped, paralyzed by the fear of their reaction. Would they understand? Could they forgive her? One night, in a moment of desperation, she called Mr. Henderson. The conversation was brief, filled with awkward pauses and unspoken questions. She asked about the girls, her voice barely a whisper. His answers were curt but kind, painting a picture of their life without her. After the call, she sat in silence, the weight of her choices heavier than ever. The man she had left for slept peacefully beside her, unaware of the storm raging in her heart. In their old home, Mr. Henderson watched the sisters sleep, their faces peaceful in the moonlight. He made a silent promise to protect them, to be there for them, no matter what. As the night deepened, the distance between them felt both vast and painfully close. Each in their own world, they were united by a shared longing, a yearning for what had been lost, and a growing understanding of the consequences of choices made and paths taken. In her new life, the mother's days were marked by a growing sense of disquiet. The man she had once viewed as her savior now seemed more like a bystander in her personal turmoil. She found herself going through the motions, her heart and mind increasingly elsewhere. Memories of her daughters haunted her, their laughter, their cries, the way they used to cling to her when they were scared or tired. The realization that she had sacrificed these precious moments for a love that now felt hollow was a bitter pill to swallow. She started to spend hours staring out the window, lost in thought, her heart heavy with regret. The need to reconnect with her daughters, to explain and perhaps to seek forgiveness, grew stronger each day. Meanwhile, the sisters were reaching their own turning point. The older sister's anger had begun to give way to a deep-seated sorrow. She missed her mother with an intensity that surprised her. Her rebellion at school and at home gradually subsided, replaced by a quiet resignation. The younger sister's illness had passed, but it left a lingering vulnerability. She became more withdrawn, her once vibrant personality dimmed by the uncertainty and instability of their situation. The bond between the sisters deepened, their shared loss a silent language only they could understand. Mr. Henderson, observing these changes, felt a growing sense of responsibility and concern. He began to reach out more, trying to bridge the gap left by their mother. He organized small outings, attempted to engage them in their hobbies, and was more attentive to their needs. But no matter how much he tried, he knew he was only a temporary fix. One day, a letter arrived for the girls. It was from their mother. With trembling hands, they opened it, their eyes scanning the words filled with love, regret, and a plea for understanding. The letter was a catalyst, bringing to the surface all the emotions they had been trying to suppress. The older sister reacted with a mix of anger and relief. She wanted to hate her mother for leaving but couldn't shake the love she still felt. The younger sister was more forgiving, her longing for their mother overriding her sense of abandonment. In her apartment, the mother waited anxiously for a response. Days turned into weeks with no word from her daughters. The silence was deafening, each day a reminder of the void she had created. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, a response came. It was cautious, the words carefully chosen, but it was a start. A door opening to a conversation, to healing, perhaps even to reconciliation. As the season changed, so did their lives. The mother, now acutely aware of the cost of her choices, began to reconsider her path. The daughters, still navigating their world without her, started to open up to the possibility of her return. This chapter in their lives was marked by introspection and change, a turning point that set the stage for what was to come, a chapter of understanding, forgiveness, and the complex journey of finding their way back to each other. As autumn turned to winter, the mother's resolve to reunite with her daughters grew stronger. The realization that her pursuit of happiness had come at too high a price was now clear. The man who had once been her everything had become a symbol of what she had lost. With a heavy heart, she made the difficult decision to leave, to try and mend the broken pieces of her family. She packed her belongings, each item a reminder of the life she had tried to build, and the one she had left behind. As she closed the door to the apartment for the last time, she felt a mix of fear and hope. There was no guarantee of forgiveness, no certainty of a happy reunion, but she knew she had to try. Back in their old home, the sisters had slowly begun to adjust to the rhythm of life with Mr. Henderson. They had grown to appreciate his efforts and kindness, but the absence of their mother was always felt, an unspoken ache in their hearts. One cold evening, as they sat around the dinner table, there was a knock at the door. Mr. Henderson went to answer it, and there, standing in the chilly night air, was their mother. The girls stood frozen, a flood of emotions washing over them. The mother's eyes were filled with tears as she looked at her daughters. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I made a terrible mistake. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to come back, to tell you both how much I love you and how much I regret leaving." The older sister, her emotions a tumultuous mix, took a step forward. She had imagined this moment many times, but now that it was here, she was overwhelmed. The younger sister followed, her eyes wide and uncertain. Mr. Henderson watched quietly, understanding his role in their story was changing. He had been a guardian, a caretaker, but he knew the family needed to heal together, without him. The sisters embraced their mother, the hug tentative at first, but then tightening as years of pain and longing were released. Words were unnecessary in that moment, the embrace said everything. In the weeks that followed, the family began the slow process of rebuilding. There were difficult conversations, tears, and laughter. The mother shared her journey, her struggles, and her realization that true happiness couldn't be found at the expense of those she loved most. The sisters shared their pain, their feelings of abandonment, but also their understanding and love. Mr. Henderson remained a supportive presence, a friend to the family, but stepped back to allow them to mend their bonds. As winter gave way to spring, the family found a new normal. They were not the same people they had been before, too much had changed. But they were together, and that was a beginning. The story of their separation and reunion became a testament to the power of forgiveness, the complexity of love, and the unbreakable bond of family. In the end, they realized that while paths may diverge, the journey always leads back home, to the heart of what truly matters.